John Schlipp is our presenter, and his program is River City's Retrospective, Music and Musicians. The last time we had a program on music and musicians, we had an overflow crowd, and everybody was really excited about it. So even though we're a small group, John, we are all excited about learning about the music of Northern Kentucky. John is the Associate Professor Librarian at NKU Steele Library, and he has done a chapter in the Covington book, which we were also privileged to hear about earlier last year. And so this is going to cover the early days of riverboat melodies, ragtime, and blues, to the mid-century country and western bluegrass rhythm. He's got it all, except for unless he would have brought the Northern Kentucky Symphony, well, it's now the Kentucky Symphony Orchestra. That would have been fun too. But he has a whole section in the Gateway City, the book entitled Gateway City, Covington, Kentucky, 1815 to 2015, and also in the Northern Kentucky, the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky. So we're glad you came. Thank you for treating us, and we appreciate your being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me go so you can see the screen, some of the images there. Perfect. Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And it's not too crowded, so it should be fine. And we've tested the audio. I'm just reviewing some housekeeping things here first before we get started. We do have audio in our presentation, and the information that you're going to learn about this evening is from both of these resources, the Gateway City Covington book and the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky. So we'll get a little overview of that, and we'll have the fun of listening to some music clips. So not only will we see visual images, we'll get to hear a few short music clips as well. So let's see how that goes. My name is John Schlipp again, and I am from Northern Kentucky University, Steele Library. And one of my colleagues is here from Steele Library today, and other folks that I recognize and know. So we've got a great crowd, although it's a small crowd, but it's very good. So what we're going to talk about tonight are music and musicians that are featured in these books that have been recently published in Northern Kentucky. And it's interesting because as you'll learn about these things this evening, kind of notice how a lot of these things were trendsetters in many cases. Trendsetters or early innovators, and much of this, of course, was adopted nationally and eventually went on to national prominence. Not just the personalities, but even some of the music originated in this area. So that's will be helpful for you to learn about today, and what's very novel anyways. Let's see where technology works. So here's what we're talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about the early music and musicians, and even up to the contemporary times. We'll talk about some of the cultural influences, especially the German and African American influences were very strong in this area, and to a lesser degree some of the Irish influence as well. We'll talk about some of the genres such as blues. We'll talk about country, bluegrass music. We'll talk a little bit about big band, jazz, and swing. We'll touch a little bit on ragtime as well, rhythm and blues, and rock and roll. So all of these types of music had some origins and influence on the national trend for many of these types of music here in this area. So let's go ahead and get started now, back in the 1800s. And to take a look at our slide here, you'll notice we have this floating palace boat here. And this was built in Newport, and it was a 250-foot long boat that seated 3,000 people. So you can imagine some of the musical performances they may have heard on this boat. And you're familiar with the showboats that went in the area, came to the area as well. But one of the things, Stephen Foster spent some time here in the Cincinnati area. And so some of his music was actually composed in Cincinnati. And there probably was some influence from some of the rhythms and sounds that he heard with some of the African Americans along the levee at that time. Some of the African American roustabouts, which we'll talk about later too. But he resided here between 1846 and 1850. And this is one of his tunes called Dancing on the River. So you can kind of hear that sound of that, kind of the roustabout sound that you might have heard along the river between Covington and Cincinnati. But then you also had some of the other types of influence of music. And what we're going to do today, you hear, we're going to have Jeopardy breaks. We're going to play Jeopardy tonight. So you'll have a chance to see if you know about the subjects that we'll talk about this evening. So we'll take a Jeopardy break here. We're going to talk about a classically trained violinist who was born in Mexico. He was educated in Paris and of Italian descent. He is credited for a famous traveling folk tune, and he is considered to be the first professional musician known to reside in northern Kentucky, way back in the 19th century. Do you know who that is? Let's take a look. Joseph Toso. Joseph Toso. And we've all heard this song before. You recognize this melody here? Now, we don't necessarily know if he was the author of this, but he definitely popularized it and had it published here in the Cincinnati area. But often you think of that more when you hear some of the country music or some of the home style music. But this was a classical musician who came up with this, and notice the Arkansas Traveler is the name of the tune.
Scored that his music.
Yes. So even someone with classically trained background had some influence on some of the square dance style or the country style music. But we mentioned earlier that a lot of the German ancestry in the area, as well as African Americans, had a lot of influence on the music. And this is a German lullaby song, a German lieder lullaby that you hear right now. But the German influence included things like the German beer halls, the beer gardens, even the churches. The Mother of God Church, Bernard Hellenbusch, he utilized the German folk song approach to his church music that was published. So we had some of the Christian church music influence, some of the beer garden music, and other types of music. And what you hear, as I mentioned here before, is one of the popular folk lieder. This is more of a German lullaby. Have you ever heard this before? And then the picture on the bottom here is where the current, which restaurant is that again? Barleycorns. Yes, the current Barleycorns restaurant there in Lakeside Park. And it was the 5 Mile House, that's originally called. And once again, it's kind of a typical type of German beer garden kind of environment. So the African Americans in this area also had a great influence on the music, especially as we'll learn with King Records at the end of our presentation tonight. But you'll notice that the Negro spiritual music, as it was called back then, was probably some of the earliest music that people heard here in the area that was popularized. And there was a group called the Fifth Jubilee Singers from Tennessee that went on a worldwide tour back in 1871, and Cincinnati was their first stop before they went on their worldwide tour. The people of Cincinnati were the first to hear them as they went on their international tour. They became very popular. They were even popular in Europe as well. So this type of music was already spreading internationally throughout the country. We know about ragtime music and the roots that occur, and we'll talk about how some of the roustabouts and some of the African Americans along the levee, some of them were actually playing some music that had a sound to ragtime even before it started, 20 years ahead of its time. There's a journalist by the name of Lafcadio Hearn. And Lafcadio Hearn, he reported that, he reported this in some of his journals and some of his publishing, that there were African Americans who were dancing to a string band of fiddle, banjo, and bass, and it had more of that sound, the way he described it, as you would describe jazz or ragtime. This was 20 years before ragtime became popular in the United States. So all of these sounds and styles were already developing right here in the Cincinnati and Covington area. Jeopardy break again. Can we play Jeopardy? Born in Covington to a poor family with 9 children, this lyricist wrote some of the best remembered American popular standards, including one which every child sings about Santa Claus every Christmas. Who is? Haven Gillespie.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. You recognize the sheet music there too? Haven Gillespie was born in Covington. He took a printing job at the Cincinnati Times-Star where he met his wife. He wrote the lyrics for some of the early 20th century ragtime tunes as well. But look at the list of all the popular songs that he wrote the lyrics to. You're in Kentucky as sure as you were born, Drifting and Dreaming, Breezing Along with the Breeze, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, of course, You Go to My Head, the old master painter, and That Lucky Old Sun. And I don't know if you, just kind of some trivia here, do you remember what popular comedian and her husband sang the song Breezing Along in the Breeze in a popular motion picture in the 1950s? It was Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz. So it's permanently popularized in classic motion pictures and The Long, Long Trailer. Remember The Long, Long Trailer? So blues music, a lot of regional blues. Again, the African-American migration from the south up into Cincinnati. Here you're hearing one of the songs by the Cincinnati Jug Band. So this was actually a live performance in the 1920s of a jug band in Cincinnati, and their song is Newport Blues. And it was about Newport. They actually have the lyrics to this song. They're talking about Newport. You hear the song played. And then the other song here we have is Southern Casey Jones. And this is a boogie-woogie style of blues, also recorded here in the Cincinnati area in the 1920s. And then one of the other jazz musicians, pictured here to the right, from Northern Kentucky, his name is James T. Jarrett. So there was a whole group of blues musicians right here from the Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky area. And you can learn more about it in Steve Tracy's scholarly book called Going to Cincinnati. He talks all about the influence of some of the blues music here in the Cincinnati area. But we're going to transition here in a moment. We're going to go from blues to more of the country home-style music that was very popular in the region.
In Scarlet Town, where I was born, there was a fair dwelling, made every youth cry well away. Her name was Barbary Allen.
WLW radio had many, many country types of programs of country music. And the reason they were so popular, obviously, as we all know, at one time WLW radio was the most powerful radio station in the world here in the central part of the Midwest and near Kentucky. So they had many rural listeners, obviously. And this was one of their first programs. Bradley Kincaid, he was one of the first artists on WLW radio to sing country music. And of course, there were many others following that. They capitalized on that Appalachian migration to the region, as we all know. And John Lair, who had the Renfro Valley Barn Dance, and also George Bigger, who created the Boone County Jamboree. These are examples of some of the programs that were very popular, and they competed with programs such as the, in Nashville, we had the Grand Ole Opry, of course, and the National Barn Dance up in Chicago. So Cincinnati was competing with Chicago and Nashville with this type of programming for many, many years.
Renfro Valley.
Yes, and Renfro Valley, of course, as well, exactly, because the Renfro Valley Barn Dance was one of the programs here initially, and then they moved down to the Renfro Valley itself, exactly. And this is an actual booklet that was available, some of the mountain ballads that he published. And this was a particular type of leaflet or a folio that he sent out free to his fans. His listeners would send in for this, and this is the kind of stuff they would send out to many of the listeners on the WLW radio programs. But the one that's the most famous, that we still all probably remember, is the Boone County Jamboree and Midwestern Game Ride. We'll talk about that shortly. So let's play Jeopardy again. This husband and wife musician team from Covington were also heard as comedians on WLW Radio's old-time musical show starting with Top of the Morning in 1926. They became nationally famous on WLW's Boone County Jamboree, which was broadcast coast to coast on the NBC radio network. Who were, do we know? Paul and Mal McCormick. And I've been told that they were in some of the very earliest Midwestern Hayride broadcasts too, but they originated back in the Boone County Jamboree that was on radio. So here you see Mal and Paul McCormick over here to the right. They lived in Newport for a while, and then they sang on an old-time country music program, their experimental radio station in the early days of radio in Covington. Then they eventually joined the WLW group in 1926 when WLW was starting to look for programming, because there was a time at WLW where people would just walk in off the street to perform on WLW radio because they needed programming when they started the station, and they didn't have any programming. So although they may have looked like amateurs, they definitely were professionals because they spent much time on this program. And it kind of reminds you of that down-home, folksy humor, and I'm certain that's why they were so popular on the WLW programs. But here's the Boone County Jamboree. And isn't it appropriate that we're in Boone County this evening talking about the Boone County Jamboree? There was a time when Boone County was much more rural than it is today. So that was the reason for the folks at WLW using that title, because just across the river was a more country environment, just close by near Cincinnati. But if you take a look here, Paul McCormick are circled on the right there, as you see. And then we have Merle Travis. Merle Travis actually started at WLW in the Boone County Jamboree. Do you remember his most famous song? That Tennessee Ernie Ford recorded as well for him? Remember?
Which one?
16 Tons.
Oh, yeah,
Right, yes.
okay.
And he sang many other songs, of course, as well. And then if you look to the lower right corner of our screen here, you will see this group that was also on the Boone County Jamboree singing country music, and they were the Williams Brothers. Does that sound familiar? Do you recognize the youngest Williams brother there in the center? Do you know who that is? Andy Williams.
Andy Williams.
So he and his brothers actually got their start at WLW Radio, singing on many programs, including the Boone County Jamboree. On more John. So this country musician formed the band initially known as the Grant County Entertainers and was heard on WCKY Radio in Covington. This musician hailed from Dry Ridge, Kentucky, and he remained at WCKY for a few years before crossing the river to perform at WLW Radio. Any idea who this Grant County country musician was? And we're not talking about Skeeter Davis. We'll talk about her later.
That's right, Skeeter.
It was Garner Pop Eckler. And his group was called Pop Eckler and All the Young'uns. That was their name. And they were very popular. They were also on WCKY Radio, WLW, but eventually they went on to WSB in Atlanta. So they did move up into the Atlanta broadcasting group as well. Among his biggest hits were You Are My Sunshine, a country version of that. I'm certain the Bing Crosby one is the other one many people think of, but there were country versions as well. And one of his other big hits, and I believe this is the one that he composed, called Money, Marbles, and Chalk. So he even made a few recordings for King Records. We'll talk a little bit about King Records shortly. Wayne Rainey. Does anyone recognize that name? Have they ever heard of Wayne Rainey before? He was another one of the WCKY radio personalities and also recorded at King Records. And here's one of his songs that he recorded with the Delmore Brothers called Blues Stay Away From Me. This was very popular in the 1940s, late 1940s. And he also recorded as a music composer and an artist for King Records. And not only did he perform, and he was a harmonica player, a very soulful harmonica player, he also composed some of the songs. So here you have a chance to listen to him with the Delmore Brothers.
Before my time at WCKY, every time we sang a song, we'd sell 50 chickens. Or something like, they had a sales pitch in between the records. Anybody's old enough to remember WCKY, because we always listened to WCKY.
Have you ever heard of the Delmore Brothers before, too? Remember that name?
I don't know, it was before my time. I mean, I don't remember all this.
They harmonized very well, the Delmore Brothers. Really good harmony, excellent harmony. But now we'll return return back to some of the Grant County roots here. We're talking about Skeeter Davis. And she was born in Grant County. However, she spent much of her childhood and some of her teen years in what's now Villa Hills. I guess at that time it was rural Kenton County. Villa Hills didn't exist, I guess, at that time. And she went to Dixie Heights High School, and one of her best friends, Betty Jack Davis, the two of them had a harmonizing style that was very, very popular. They recorded, I believe, for RCA Records, and they were extremely popular in the 1950s. And unfortunately, there was a tragic automobile accident when they were returning home, coming through North Cincinnati, I believe on US 42. It was a tragic car accident where her singing partner was killed in a car crash. And this song that you're going to hear here, one of her most famous songs, was basically a song about losing her best friend in that car crash. But you'll recognize the song as you hear the end of the song. Recognize that one?
Yes.
Now this one, I know all of you will get this one. You've got to get this, Jeffrey. In Boone County, known as the Round Mound of Sound, this Boone County country singer and musician would forever be associated with the nationally famous song of a law enforcement officer of his Northern Kentucky home county, and the 70s pop culture phrase, "You're in a heap of trouble, boy." Now, we all have to know who this is.
Yeah, he was our neighbor.
Kenny Price. And of course, we have to hear, oh, and by the way, you see, he's on the upper right-hand corner there. That's in his trimmer days, as you can see there. He had a little bit more trim there in the upper right. And you also see Bonnie Lou there to the center.
Oh, yeah.
And she just passed away recently, as you probably know.
Is that the
Bonnie Lou.
K's?
She did.
Oh, the 3 Ks aren't it? It's too early for
The
those.
three,
If I recognize some of the other folks, just some of the musicians.
the Arnold girls, I know
Yeah,
who you mean.
they're not in there. It's too early for
Okay.
them.
Yeah. Now, they've renamed part of US 42 in Florence, the Kenny Price Memorial
Well, that
Drive.
makes sense, yes.
I remember when he
That's right.
started, he couldn't even play a guitar. He just sat there going.
Well, before we listen to his most famous song, I do have to tell you a Kenny Price story. When I was 5 years old, in 1965, we used to go to the Cincinnati Reds games, Crosley Field, frequently. And we came down to Cincinnati, and I don't know if it was before or after, we went to Frisch's downtown near Crosley Square. And after the Crosley Reds game, we went to the Midwestern Hayride. And we're going up the steps of Crosley Square. Do you remember all those steps on Crosley Square? We're walking up the steps. I'm only a little 5-year-old kid. And down the steps comes Kenny Price, and he's huge. And my mom said hello to Kenny Price, and he stopped. And we're from up in the Dayton, Ohio area. I didn't think we knew Kenny Price. He stopped and he talked with us for 5 minutes. Because we were from out of town. He wanted to know how we were doing, what were we up to. We told him we went to the Reds game. We just came from Frisch's, and he was talking with us for 5 minutes. My mom was talking with him about some of his songs or whatever. And then when he left, I thought, oh my gosh, is my mom friends with Kenny Price? When you're 5 years old and you see these programs on WLW television, and you don't know the difference between that and what's from Los Angeles or New York. I thought he was a big celebrity. Of course, he was a big celebrity and ultimately went on to Heat Hall, as we know. But he was very, very friendly, and I remember that as a 5-year-old kid. But here's his most famous song that all of you should know here in Boone County. You don't recognize this.
I do.
I'm sure the rest of the crowd won't.
Just like a mountain, I was sheriff of Boone County. Let me tell you what, you can get in trouble.
I think this was around 76, so around the bicentennial year. It was popular.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone all passing through, you better mind your P's and Q's. Just let them
And that was probably among his most famous recordings. It was very popular nationally.
Chevrolet, but you can't outrun
Sheriff of Boone County.
With Elmer Wright.
Yeah.
What's that?
Elmer Wright they were good friends.
Elmer Wright was the sheriff.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
That makes
So
sense.
no hard feelings. No hard feelings.
One other point before we leave our country music category here, just to point out, this is one of the things we learned when we worked on the Covington bicentennial book, and I wasn't aware of this, that the National Folk Festival was actually held here in Covington for a few years in the early 1960s. And there were people like the Kinston Trio, Joan Baez, and even Peter, Paul, and Mary appeared here in Covington for part of the National Folk Festival. Now it's gone on to other areas. I think it's in the East, it's now more popular, but there was a period of time when it was held here in the region, in Covington.
Hi there, fellas. What you say? This is a little fast swallow. My mother's 285 pounds of jam, jive, and everything. They got me in on this beat this message this afternoon, so here it is. Watch out. One of my own compositions. Ain't this right here? And I ain't see.
So I think you probably recognize who this is, Fats Waller. He actually performed and played the organ and the piano at WLW Radio, and he was the organist for many years on the Moon River program on WLW. So he actually got his national prominence claim to fame first in Cincinnati before he went back to New York. He started in New York, that's where he's from, but it wasn't until he came to WLW that he started to gain that momentum and popularity. But other folks were here. WLW is known as the Cradle of the Stars. I'm certain you've heard that before. But people like the groups such as the Mills Brothers and the Ink Spots actually started at WLW Radio in Cincinnati. And of course, Doris Kepelhoff. You know who that is? Doris Day. And Doris Day's still alive. I believe she's 94, 95 years old now. She's still alive. Yes.
You was talking about the organ. Did you ever see the organ from WLW?
Yes.
Up there in that restaurant, I don't know if it's still there or not, but
It's
it would come up
huge.
out of the
Yeah.
floor.
Huge, had a theatrical world or stuff like that.
We went up
Let's take a Jeopardy break again. Here we go. Okay. This television cast member of Jack Parr's CBS Morning Show and the NBC's Today Show was better known for her big band singing and association with her famous Northern Kentucky sibling.
Rosemary Clooney.
Betty.
Betty.
And Betty's the forgotten one, unfortunately. And Nick Clooney has made comments many times that of the three of them, she was really the most talented. And my mom used to be a big fan of Betty Clooney too, and I never knew that was Betty Clooney. So she's finally getting her recognition once again now. People are learning the history of the Clooney family. And that is Betty singing with Rosemary. When they made this recording when White Christmas premiered in 1954, the Columbia recording that Rosemary made was not with Vera Ellen, it was with her sister, the Columbia recording that was released. But she also got her start when she returned after they separated and Rosemary went on her own. She returned to Cincinnati for a short period of time and worked on the 50/50 Club with Ruth Lyons. And she also recorded for King Records. And then she returned to New York. I think Rosemary was still in New York at the time. And when she was in New York, she also sang at some of the nightclubs and eventually was on NBC and CBS television in the 1950s.
Who comes between me and my sister? And Lord help the sister who comes between me and my man.
Time for Jeopardy break. One more. Since we're talking about big band, before we get to our Jeopardy break, just a reminder, Bob Braun also sang big band music. He always talked about how he was a lifeguard at Coney Island, but I don't know why he didn't talk about this. Apparently, he sang at the Moonlight Gardens during the big band era as well.
Really?
So who would have thought that Bob Braun was a big band singer? I know he sang. He was a singer, of course, but it was more popular. But he actually sang during the big band era at the Moonlight Gardens there at Coney Island. Now it's time for Jeopardy. There we go.
Yeah, he used to talk about taking singing lessons. He took singing lessons, he said that on television, that he took singing lessons.
I think he won The talent show of Arthur Godfrey?
That's right,
Yeah.
yes. But I just didn't realize that he was a band singer.
Arthur,
before.
there
You
was
don't think about that.
another person on WOW that was singing on, and I don't know his name.
Well,
Big guy.
speaking of WLW, we can't get away with WOW. can we? Fort Wright musician resigned from Vic Damone's road band. Remember Vic Damone, the popular vocalist in the 1950s? Apparently, his road band musician, lead musician, this is the person we're talking about from Fort Wright. He returned home to support the popular Crosley, later AVCO programming on WLW's television network, such as the Paul Dixon Show. So this musician was prominent on the Paul Dixon Show, another clue. He also served as an administrator in the Covington school system as well. Does anyone know who this musician was?
Wasn't Burt Bacharach, was it? No.
But his last name begins with a B.
You said on the Paul Dixon show?
Uh-huh.
Bruce Brownfield.
Oh,
Schlipp
okay.
Black was the one that was in charge on the 50/50 Club, but Bruce Brownfield was on the Paul Dixon Show, remember? He was the lead musician and the pianist there.
That's
And he's from Fort Wright. And you notice there's Bonnie Lou again, and with Paul Dixon. Mary Ellen Tanner, does that name sound familiar? Or Mary Ellen Tanner. And her style of singing, of course, she was very attracted to the jazz style of music and did an exceptional job with her jazz performances. Almost reminds you a little bit of Rosemary Clooney's jazz renaissance, the style of music. And she got her fame where she originally was discovered on the Ted Mack Amateur Hour as well, in 1964. And then a few years later, Nick Clooney kind of discovered her and invited her to perform on his daytime program when he was on WCPO, I believe. It was one of WCPO. And that led her performing on the Bob Braun 50/50 Club. This past the days of Ruth Lyons in the Bob Braun era. And then eventually Bob Braun invited her to be part of the cast on the 50/50 Club.
She has that real velvety voice.
Beautiful voice.
Her dad was a Covington policeman.
Yeah.
And I was fortunate, just like we've had a chance to talk to Bonnie Lou in recent years before she passed away, we did have a chance to talk with Mary Ellen Tanner when we did some of the research for the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky. And she was very friendly, and she was so honored to be included in the research. So just we were glad that we could learn about her life and include her in the collection of all of these musicians we've talked about this evening.
He was talking about this on the radio, in the late 40s. We didn't listen that much because it had a 6-volt battery on it. You have to put a battery in that. You had to go to the garage and get it charged up. So we didn't run electric.
So we're going to have another Jeopardy break. One more. How's that? And it has to do with the King Records musicians. So we haven't talked much yet about King Records, have we? And one of the things that you'll see on the slide before, Randy McNutt, the author of Guitar Towns, he talks about this Cincinnati sound that developed, especially in the 1950s and 60s. And much of it had to do with that kind of that combination of the country and the blues and the R&B. You kind of have, as he calls it, this unique blues rock sound that kind of developed. The other thing I always notice too, when you listen to some of the early King Records recordings, especially the country King Records recordings, it sounds awfully similar to some of the music on the Ruth Lyons band as well. Their WLW band on the Ruth Lyons 50/50 Club, some of their sounds very similar to some of the country music at times that was recorded on King Records. So they were Nelson Burton, Ed Conley, and Albert Washington. These are some of the backup musicians that you had at King Records. And in particular, what I'd like to point out is Nelson Burton. Nelson Burton published a memoir a few years ago called My Life in Jazz. And he talks about growing up in Covington. He talks about being a house musician at the Cotton Club over in Cincinnati and being the backup musician over at King Records. He even talks about the stories when he was young, how when Fats Waller would play live on WOW radio when he was done with that performance, whatever, 11 o'clock or 11:30 to 12 o'clock, whenever Moon River was aired on WOW. When that was over, he would go across the river into Covington and play in the many musical establishments for jazz and band music in Covington. So Fats Waller even had some connections to Covington when he was in Cincinnati. And that's the first I had heard of that when Nelson Burton revealed this in his memoir, My Life in Jazz. So here's an example of one very famous recording from King Records that many cite as being the first recording of rock and roll. 5 years before rock and roll was even popular in the United States. Take a listen. It's performed by Winona Harris, and this song is called Good Rocking Tonight. This was recorded again in 1947. Think about what most of the music sounded like in 1947. Didn't sound anything like that. So this was from Cincinnati, long before the rest of the country heard this sound. At King Records, there was another unique thing that was going on as well, or a unique approach. I like to call it kind of like a cross-pollination between the different genres of music, long before anyone else would think about this. And it wasn't just because of the diversity aspect or because of the talent that was there. Some of this had to do with the economic aspect, because the owner, Sidney Nathan, he was a very frugal businessman, and he wanted to get as much as he could out of all those songs that he owned the copyright for, what they recorded there at King Records. So if there was something that was popular for the country market, he said, we're going to record it for the blues market. And if there was something that was popular for the blues market, we're going to try recording it for the country market. So he would kind of cross-pollinate, more for economic reasons, but in the long term, we all know this kind of unique diversity, kind of that melting pot approach to combine the different types of genres. And take a look at one of the best examples. You're going to hear the song called Why Don't You Haul Off and Love Me. Now that sounds like a crazy title, but you'll recognize the song when you hear it. It was extremely popular in 1949. But you're first going to hear the country version, then you're going to hear the R&B version, and then you're going to hear a more recent contemporary remake as well. So let's first listen to Wayne Rainey's version of this.
Why don't you haul off and love me one more time? Why don't you squeeze me until I'm turned?
You recognize the melody now?
Yeah.
It was popular in 49.
Love me like I want you to do. I'm gonna haul off and die over you.
So he was the original composer and the original performer of this song. But now listen to what they did. They had one of their R&B musicians record the same thing.
I told you all off and love me one more time.
And it still sounds good. Different genre, the same song.
If you don't come love and love
But Bolus Jackson, he was one of the earliest R&B musicians to record for King Records. Okay, now let's come up to more contemporary times, 1997. I still think 1997 is fairly contemporary compared to the rest of the things we've heard this evening. Listen to what a country sound of today would do with this song.
Now I can feel the warmth near here. Breathe the song line. I can feel that glow all up and down my spine. I breathe and love.
And the name of this group, by the way, is called Stroke Belly. It's a local group from Cincinnati.
Why don't you haul off and love me
Just a different slang.
Now, where was King Records located?
When you drive along I-71 near Xavier University, that's
Yeah.
right around the corner, it's a couple blocks from
That's
Xavier
what I
University, you can
thought.
still see where the studio is standing. And
Yeah.
I'm trying to come up with some funds to make it into a museum,
I know.
because there is some historic significance to it, and it's still standing there.
Yeah.
It's a miracle that I-71 didn't
Didn't
bulldoze
take
the
it.
place
I
down.
know.
It's still there.
It's right next to it.
Yes, and you can see it every time
Yeah.
you go up down I-71 here in the neighborhood.
At the historical site now? Isn't it
think
a
so.
historical
Yes,
site?
it has a historical marker too, exactly. So to bring us all full circle, it's a little more contemporary. When I say contemporary, now we're talking about things in the 70s and 80s and today. Here's some of the other musicians you still have that are prominently known from our area today. First off, the Northern Kentucky Brotherhood Singers. Have you ever heard them before?
Oh, yeah.
They're going to be here next Friday.
They are. Oh, they're wonderful. I didn't know that. What a good timing. First time I heard them was at Mother of God Church. They performed at some of the churches too. Excellent, excellent. They have that cross between the gospel, barbershop quartet, and rhythm and blues. They're very talented. So they are going to be here at the library? Fantastic.
sure.
There we go. Well, that's a nice plug for them, isn't it? Adrian Ballou, he's one of the other prominent musicians from the area. He was an eclectic musician, played all different types of music. And he performed with everyone from Frank Zappa to David Bowie, who passed away recently, the Talking Heads, and King Crimson and others. And then Michael Connor was one of the musicians from the Pure Prairie League. You remember the Pure Prairie League? Their biggest hit was the song Amy. Remember that song? Early 1970s. I guess we're all giving away our age here, aren't we? So there's other musicians, I'm certain, as well, but just kind of bring us close to the present here to see how they have the influence here. But as you can see, especially with the country music and the rhythm and blues, there's quite an influence in this area in the Cincinnati, Covington, and Northern Kentucky region. So that kind of wraps it up. If you want to learn more about these people and others, remember both books, the new Covington Bicentennial Gateway City book, as well as the Encyclopedia of Northern Kentucky, has a wealth of information on the music and musicians from this area, not to mention, as you all know, all the other wonderful historical topics too. So thank you again, and I hope it was entertaining.
It was.
May I say one thing? Boy, did you just strike a nerve when you were talking about